So I got invited today. I got invited by Glenn and Aishwarya to have this presentation, and I met already Glenn a couple of years ago through some common acquaintances. And we also had an experience of being in a workshop together when I was giving workshops for the PhD community in Leiden University. So this is why Glenn invited me in the first place to give this workshop, and I'm really excited about that. So today's workshop is called Eco-Anxiety, a webinar on why we seek control on an era of uncertainty. So we're going to play a lot with these words, control and uncertainty today. Before I start, I want to remind you that human beings are notorious for one thing, for many things, but this specifically, for our resistance to change. It's not that we don't change, it's that we are resisting. We don't want to change too fast, or when we're not ready to do something, to proceed to the change. And the reason we are resisting to change is one and single reason: because we are afraid. We are not ready. We haven't processed why we're changing. And a type of fear is anxiety. That's why we're here today, in order to understand why we're feeling anxiety. What is this fear that we are experiencing? Where is this coming from? How we deal with this fear, with this anxiety? And is this helping us the way we deal with this anxiety, or we should invent, or we should introduce and explore different ways of coping with this fear? So that's what we're going to discuss today. A few words about me. My name is Vasis Sarandopoulou and I'm a psychologist. I come from Greece and I studied psychology in Greece, and I did my first master in counseling and career guidance in Athens, Greece. I worked for a couple of years in Athens in my private practice, but also for other organizations as a counselor, but also organizing workshops for psychologists. And then in 2013, I decided that it's about time that I further explore psychology, but also another culture. And this is where I moved to Leiden, and I did my second master in psychology. Meanwhile, I was doing a lot of trainings, courses in grief counseling, emotionally focused therapy, schema therapy. And in 2015, I started my own company, which is called Anti-Loneliness. And the reason that I gave this name is because I think loneliness is a universal problem, and it's a problem because we don't talk about it. As a feeling, loneliness is something that nobody escapes, and there's nothing abnormal about feeling lonely. But it's a problem because we don't feel comfortable in talking about loneliness. And there are many reasons that we feel lonely, but at the same time, when we deal with that as a taboo, then we're not helping resolve this complicated feeling. So loneliness is also the umbrella under which mental health issues such as anxiety, burnout, loneliness, and relationships and depression and grief are beneath that umbrella. And through my company, I'm helping people deal with their mental health issues, connect with other people. And that's why I am offering individual counseling, couples counseling, support groups, and workshops. Not only me, but also my team of psychologists. And lately, I am also organizing workshops and courses that I provide through Anti-Loneliness Academy. I believe in the power of awareness, and I want to help people gain more self-awareness that will lead us eventually to self-growth. And that's what I'm bringing through my work. And also through my social media, where I share a lot of content for mental health and self-awareness. We are going to talk about, first of all, to understand eco-anxiety. We're going to try to understand where is it coming from and what is its consequences, how we cope so far with the crisis, and what are the dysfunctional ways we're coping. We're going to discuss a little bit about theories on change and on loss. And the last part will be how to embrace the future in a healthy way and in a helpful way. What is eco-anxiety? It's exactly what the word says. It's the anxiety we feel because of all these changes in our environment. It's the persistent worries about the future of Earth and the life it shelters. And it's a natural response, it's a normal response to a threat. And we're going to talk about that also next. And it's because it's a very real threat. According to the American Psychological Association, eco-anxiety is a chronic fear of environmental doom. And according to an environmental philosopher, Glenn Albrecht, it is the generalized sense that the ecological foundations of existence are in the process of collapse. So you see that the words are really powerful, collapse, and the ecological foundation of existence. And that's why it's something that we feel very intense. But how we feel, what are the sources of our eco-anxiety? And how we get into contact, let's say, or we see the impact of eco-anxiety. First of all, there are three channels of impact of what's happening around us, and they're direct, indirect, and via awareness. What does it mean? People that they are in direct contact, or they have experienced from very close environmental change, are the first ones that they're going to feel eco-anxiety. And these are the people that they have experienced wildfires, hurricanes, flood, temperature change, extreme heat, or increased rainfall, loss of biodiversity, water stress and water shortage, rising sea levels, deforestation, food insecurity, shrinking rainforest, and coral reef destruction. But also people that they see the indirect impact of environmental change. Like, for example, people that see the reduce of agricultural output, or people that they live in areas that they used to be touristic attractions because of the natural environment, but now they're not anymore. And of course, you don't need to be the direct recipient of an environmental change. Just by hearing the news, you can get this anxiety feeling. Just by knowing the risks of climate change can be very powerful and very stressful. Who is most at risk, not for getting the impact of the environmental change, but who is most at risk of feeling the eco-anxiety that we're talking about? Mainly people that live in coastal or island regions, or dry areas, or other regions with high geological risk. People that they are living in socioeconomically disadvantaged communities, or families with lower income. Children, older adults, people with chronic health concerns and disabilities, people that rely on fishing and hunting and farming, and they face the loss of their income and the loss of the way of life. People that they live in travel destinations, as we said before, which feature beautiful natural environments, and they see how this environment is changing. But also indigenous people whose life revolved around sea ice, and they not only face the loss of the way of life, but also their cultural and personal identity. And by saying that, I want to jump into the next chapter, which is talking about what are the consequences of people experiencing this eco-anxiety. And one of them is exactly related with these indigenous communities. And I found this quote from one of the Inuit elders who said, "We are people of the sea ice. And if there's no more sea ice, how do we be people of the sea ice?" So you see how this affects not only their way of life, but their own identity. And that's a term that I would actually like to introduce you, which is the term solastalgia. It's a word that comes from the word solatium, Latin word solatium, comfort, which means comfort, and Greek root algos, which means pain. And it means the pain we feel because we are losing this comfort, this safety that we used to feel in an environment. Whatever seemed to feel like home until now, it doesn't feel like home. We're not feeling safe anymore. So it's a form of emotional or even existential distress caused by environmental change. We're feeling homesick for our environment, and because our home environment is changing in ways that we find distressing. And that homesickness leads to us getting detached from this place, from a place that has been important to us until now. But it's not anymore. Or we're feeling that we have to uproot ourselves so that we can survive, emotionally or physically survive. And that is the term solastalgia. And that's not only that doesn't only apply for a specific place, but it also applies for us feeling like home in our planet even. And this planet doesn't feel so safe anymore, doesn't provide this comfort, this safe embrace anymore. So that's one thing that we start feeling, and it's related, very much related with eco-anxiety. Another term related is the ecological grief. It's the grief we feel, which is in relation to experience or anticipated ecological losses, including the loss of species, ecosystems, and meaningful landscapes due to acute or chronic environmental change. And very often, this kind of grief feels like a disenfranchised grief. What do we mean with this term? It's a grief we feel that we are not entitled to feel, as if it's not ours. Like if, for example, a relative of your colleague has died and you're feeling the grief, but at the same time, you're feeling that you shouldn't feel grief because it's not a person that you love, it's somebody else's person. So this is the term disenfranchised. We're feeling exactly the same thing here as well, that we are grieving, but at the same time, we question that feeling. We feel that this is not a valid emotion, or there's no space to express it. There's nobody to talk about that, or there's nobody to understand that feeling, to share that experience with us. And also, we're grieving the physical ecological loss. We're grieving the loss of environmental knowledge, the fact that we don't know how to explain things that are happening in our environment. Also, we're grieving for the anticipated future loss of culture and of livelihoods. We're also grieving for the loss of opportunities and privileges related to nature and to our environment. I read an article where a father was explaining that I'm feeling sad to see that the place that I used to go for skiing in winters, which is in my village, doesn't have any snow anymore. So this mountain cannot offer the opportunity for skiing to my son. I'm grieving the fact that I cannot take my son to the same place where I learned skiing so that I can teach him. And I can actually teach him being emotionally connected with that environment. That meant something for me and for my childhood. And it may sound like a first world problem, the fact that he cannot take your son to this, ski resort and teach him skiing. But behind this statement, we can see the grief for the loss of the environment, for the loss of a part of our childhood, something that was there when we were children, but it's not here anymore. Also, we're grieving for the dreams that we have to let go. It's incredible how many couples and people generally I meet nowadays, and they tell me that I'm not going to have kids because I'm afraid of the world that they are going to inherit. This is a dream that we have to let go. The dream of having a family, of having kids. And it's related with our eco-anxiety. We are so scared to bring another human being and give them all this responsibility and give them a future that seems to be so doomed. Sorry. So all this grief and anxiety that we're experiencing, of course, is putting our mental health at risk. And these are a couple of surveys and polls that I found, and I have all the references at the end of the presentation. So I'm going to share them with you. So according to a 2018 national survey, almost 70% of people in the United States are worried about climate change, and around 51% they feel helpless. A 2020 poll from the American Psychological Association found that more than half of respondents were somewhat or extremely anxious about the effects of climate change on their own planet, or on their own mental health. So we're going to break down a little bit what is this emotional impact on our mental health. First of all, it's worry. We're constantly worrying. And it's this kind of worry that it's not productive. It's a rumination. We're just going on to negative thoughts, worst case scenarios, apocalyptic scenarios of the world and of the future. Also, we're feeling really guilty sometimes. We are regretting former decisions, or we are feeling guilty that we are not more active and we should have been, but we haven't done. And we're feeling guilty because we're still eating meat, or we're still consuming plastic bottles, or we're still using air condition, or we're still taking the airplane to travel all around the planet. And all this guilt is there on the background. We're also feeling shame, consequently, because of our personal impact and the things that we are still doing. We're also feeling hopeless and desperate. And this is what we call as the double bind effect, which means that wherever I do, nothing will change. Even if I do something, it will be done and nothing will be changed. Even if I don't do something, still nothing will change. And it's just an imminent catastrophe about to happen. And another example that I also read was from a teacher who was trying to figure out how to convey the message around eco-anxiety to kids, or the message around climate change to kids. So he was also feeling very desperate. And he said, it's like a paradigm shift. Like when you learn that Santa Claus isn't real, how am I going to say that to the kids? Everything we teach them, that science is a tool for understanding the world, that adults are protecting you, it just falls apart. And there's nothing to prepare them for this enormous problem that we simply haven't solved. So children are having a hard time understanding it, but also adults are having a hard time to explain it to the kids, and to explain it because we haven't understood what is our position, how we're going to deal with that, and especially emotionally deal with that. We're also feeling very vulnerable. We are all afraid to die, but we don't like thinking about it. And a catastrophe or an imminent emotional environmental change is reminding us of our mortality. We are confronted with this scenario that we're going to die, and maybe we're going to die earlier than when we have expected to die. And this is a very painful reminder, of course. We don't want to be reminded of something like that. We don't want to be reminded that we cannot change everything. We are out of control. We are not omnipotent. We don't want to be reminded like that, but we are. And we are confronted with this reminder, and we don't know what to do with that. The fact that we cannot predict the future. We had developed science and technology, and we thought that we can predict everything, but we cannot. And environmental change is this painful reminder. Also, our relationships are being also wounded because of this change. More aggression, more violence. You also see it during the pandemic. The numbers of domestic violence and divorces have skyrocketed. We're talking about environmental changes, but also a pandemic is a change in our environment, is a change of what we think is safe around us. Conflict increases, social stability decreases. there are various reviews that they show that high temperatures cause people to become more bad-tempered and lead to increased physical violence. So we do change together with our planet, together with the temperature, together with the sunshine or with the rainfalls. Another related emotional impact is trauma. I'm going to give you some examples. Researchers follow more than 1,700 children who lived through 4 major hurricanes, Ike, Charlie, Katrina, and Andrew. And their results, published early this year, they found that up to half of the children went on to experience symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. And for 10% of these children, the symptoms became chronic. So it is a traumatic experience. And I'm going to explain what is a traumatic experience. In another study published in 2018, researchers gathered data on the mental health of nearly 2 million people between 2002 and 2012, and local climates during that time period. And they found that even 1.8 degrees Fahrenheit, 1 degree Celsius of warming was linked to 2% increase of reported mental health issues. Another example, the Australia's Black Saturday bushfires in 2009 left 15.6% of the affected community with symptoms of PTSD years after the event. So when we're talking about trauma, what is it? Trauma is not what happens to you. Trauma is what happens inside you because of what happens to you. So these are the words of Gabor Mate, who is a psychologist, expert on trauma. And when we're talking about trauma, we have the obvious trauma and the hidden trauma. Obvious is when you are directly subdued to a traumatic experience, like, for example, in a car accident, or when you have been physically abused. While the hidden trauma is an emotionally overwhelming experience that you carry with you, and you have all the questions and the shame around this event or around this experience. And it can be even being bullied or being betrayed or experiencing grief or loss in your life. That can be a trauma as well. And when we're talking about trauma and post-traumatic stress, which can be also a post-traumatic stress disorder, if it's a chronic issue, we're talking about anxiety, we're talking about panic attacks, we're talking about even depression sometimes. We're talking about recurring negative thoughts and memory problems. We're engaging in maladaptive trauma responses, which is drug abuse, alcohol, denial or avoidance, or even risky behaviors. We're talking about sleeping problems or being restless or irritated. So when we are talking about all these surveys and all these polls that followed people after traumatic events, this is exactly what they were experiencing. Even though they found a place, even though everything was okay after a couple of months, still the impact was there. The emotional impact doesn't go away within a day. And especially if not processed, it can last longer. For children, it can be even more stressful. And especially when they are not comforted or validated, it can easily lead them to being dysregulated, which means that they don't know what to do with themselves. They are very agitated, they're restless, or they are avoiding and they are isolating. They cannot control their feelings. And of course, it leads a lot of people to depression and to more suicidal thoughts or suicide attempts. And one reason, of course, is, for example, to give you an example, in areas that there's an increased rainfall, more rain means less sun. And sunlight promotes the production of a hormone we need in order to feel happy, in order to feel satisfied in our lives, which is serotonin. And without sunlight, we are at greater risk to mood-related symptoms like depression or seasonal depression. That's why in winter, we feel more depressed because there's less sunlight. Or for other people, that any environmental change means financial discomfort, financial stress that can also disrupt their social life. And especially even if they have to relocate, especially if they have to relocate. And another example is in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina, the suicide rate for the general population rose by about 300%. But for those who were displaced and they had to move into trailer parks, it rose by over 1400%. So what we are experiencing is much more complicated than what's happening externally. There's a whole turmoil happening inside us as well. And unfortunately, we haven't had the chance to talk about it, but this is what we're starting to do now more and more. Eco-anxiety is a new term. People are just starting to talk about eco-anxiety. It's not a clinical disorder. You cannot find it in the clinical books, but it is something that draws a lot of attention, and we need to pay a lot of attention. How we cope with crisis. It's a big thing, it's a massive thing to live with the suspicion that we're completely screwed. So where all this stress goes, how we cope with all this anxiety. And what I'm going to explain now is the dysfunctional ways that we are coping, the maladaptive ways that we're coping, the coping strategies that we are using so far, but they are not helping. And I have divided all these ways that we're coping into 3 categories. I don't know if you have heard before the coping mechanisms of fight, flight, or freeze. This is something similar that I'm going to explain to you today. We cope in 3, let's say, general ways, which is avoid, surrender, or overcompensate. What do we mean with avoid? Avoid is when somebody is in denial, doesn't accept that this is an issue. No, it's okay. I mean, people are exaggerating. This is all, like maybe a trend, or maybe it's a group of people that they believe that there's climate change, but actually we are okay. And remember, a couple of years ago, we also said that we're running out of paper, we're running out of trees, and we are okay, see? So it's just, like a bubble, and don't believe that. So we want to believe that this is not true. This is a way we're coping because we don't know what to do with this overwhelming feeling that we're scared and we are doomed, or what's going to happen. We don't know how to deal with that in a healthy way. So we are recruiting denial or toxic positivity. It's going to be okay. Don't worry. It's a matter of time. People will figure out what will happen and everything is okay. Don't talk about this. So dismissing other people or even dismissing ourselves every time that these concerns just come up on the surface. And of course, it is a very disconnecting feeling. It feels like we are living on a separate world. It feels like we're living on another planet, not being part of this community, having these worries. Another coping mechanism is surrender, which is we see the problem, we acknowledge the problem, but we are more into the desperate side. We are more into, so what's the point? Okay, even if I worry, what's going to change if I worry? Who am I to change anything? Just by recycling? What's the change in me recycling a couple of bottles a year? Nothing. There's nothing I can do about it. The climate change will just follow its course, and we just have to accept it and surrender to that. And of course, that's not a helpful coping mechanism because, of course, we know that this is not true. And of course, we know that we should have been doing something, that we all have a small part of responsibility in all that, small or big part of responsibility. We all can change a little bit, which is in combination with a little bit of everybody else can be a huge bit. And that means that since we know all this, we are keeping all this guilt inside us, but also all these negative emotions that we're feeling. Remember, the hopelessness is a feeling that we are feeling, but also a coping mechanism. We go into hopelessness because we don't know what to do with our anxiety and with our fear. But that doesn't mean that the fear and the anxiety are dissolved. They are just inside us. They are still inside us, and they are keep bottling up. And the fact that we are surrendering, we don't talk to anybody, or we are just ruminating over negative thoughts and negative scenarios, we still create more negative feelings. So that's why we say that this is a not helpful coping mechanism. And the third not helpful coping mechanism is the overcompensate. So imagine the denial or the hopelessness that when we do nothing about the problem, now we go to the other extreme, which is the overcompensating, which is we do a lot, much more than we can take, or much more than other people can take. And that can take many forms or patterns. It's not only being an activist, it's an activist that turns their action into bullying. It's an activist that threatens, terrorizes, bullies other people. And when they are voicing their concerns, they are there to say, okay, I hear you, but what are you doing for that? Nothing? Okay, don't talk to me. So this is the hostility, the aggression that brings actually the opposite result. And instead of inviting people to participate and to help, you're pushing people away. You're making people feel even more vulnerable. We're making people feel that they're doing something completely wrong or that they're completely useless. And also people that they are putting all this energy and all this aggressive energy into their mission. They're the people that also feel physically and mentally exhausted very soon. It's not sustainable if you're always angry at people, if you're always yelling and protesting in a way that creates enemies around you. And of course, some people will follow you, but creating enemies, it's not sustainable. It will eventually demotivate the person that had a really good intention initially, but it didn't support it in a way that can bring more funds instead of more enemies. So that's why these three coping mechanisms have been backfiring. And we're trying to figure out how to create more coping mechanisms that they're more healthy, that they can help us, because these three are actually not helping a lot. And again, the way we cope through these three ways is because we don't know how to handle our fear and our anxiety in a healthy way. It's something pushing us to do something, but we don't know, and we are being either too fast or too slow, either too low or too loud. But we want to find another window of tolerance without going into despair and without going into aggression. We want to find a window of tolerance in there so that we can protest and we can persuade people and we can activate people, but in another way. What I would like now to share with you is a couple of theories and concepts related with change and loss. And first of all, it's a concept called locus of control. Locus is a Latin word, means location. Where is the place of control? What do you think is who do you think is responsible for your life? And we have inner locus of control and outer locus of control, internal and external. People that have more inner locus of control, they are people that they believe that I can make things happen. I am responsible for my life, for my future. While people that they have outer locus of control, they believe that things happen to them. I don't have a word on that. I don't have responsibility. I'm just the recipient of things and events happening to my life. And of course, we're not either or. We are more of one and more of the other. But what happens is that people that they have more inner locus of control, they can cope better in disasters. Why? Because people with more inner locus of control are the ones that they are more proactive. They have this self-efficacy, self-trust that they can set a goal and they can make it happen. They can achieve this goal. While people without a locus of control, they're more passive, they're more depending, they're waiting for things to happen. They are more, depending on life or external circumstances. So individuals with inner locus of control, when they are in front of disasters or change or confusion or challenging situations, they take control, they take action faster and sooner than the others. However, too much inner locus of control can also backfire, or too much outer locus of control. Too much outer locus of control, you can imagine, because we become too passive. Life happens for us, others make decisions for us. But also too much inner locus of control can backfire. Why? Because we feel responsible even for things that we are not responsible. We are not able to let go a little bit. We're not able to rest a little bit. We're feeling constantly stressed or feeling restless that we should be doing something. We are responsible for something. And that can backfire because that can block us, that can exhaust us, that can burn us out if we feel responsible for everything. So ideally, we want more inner locus of control than outer locus of control, but not 100% inner locus of control. Being able to realize up to which point is our responsibility, up to which degree we can help, and what is the threshold after which we are going to burn out. This is what we need to understand. So this is the locus of control. Another concept that I would like to introduce to you is what we call empathy gap. Empathy gap is a cognitive bias that causes people to struggle to understand mental states that are different from their present state. To give you a simple example, before we go into the climate, the environmental change example. If you wake up this morning and you're feeling happy, energized, it's very possible that you will say something like, oh my God, I have so much energy today. I'm going to work 10 hours nonstop and I'm going to finish the report and I'm going to deliver it by the end of the day. That is empathy gap, because you cannot empathize with yourself 10 hours from now. You're only judging how you are exactly this moment. And you think that you're going to be the same person in the same mood 10 hours from now, which is not the case. You haven't actually anticipated that you will be hungry, tired, sleepy, maybe even angry because you got, messages or calls, or your mom called and she upset you because she said something about your sister. We cannot anticipate, we cannot empathize, and that's normal. But that's the empathy gap that we also have in regards to our anxiety about the environment. We are judging only based on the facts that we have right now. We don't have the mental capacity to imagine, to conceive what's going to happen in 10 years from now. What kind of technologies, what kind of philosophies, what kind of systems and strategies people will have invented by then, and we're going to use them. What kind of resources we're going to have by then. So Paul Behrens, who is the author of this book, which is called The Best of Times, The Worst of Times, and he's talking about the balance between optimism and pessimism. He said that for civilization to thrive, humanity will require philosophies that they are not yet conceived of, and governance systems that they haven't yet developed. So we have to take that into considerations when we are starting to feel overwhelmed or scared about the future. We don't know yet the future, and we cannot know the future. Our brain cannot imagine that. The same way that my dad's brain could not conceive 20 years ago that he will be using a smartphone. He could not have imagined something like that. If somebody would say something like that to him 20 years ago, he would laugh and he would say, yeah, come on, no. We cannot conceive what will happen in the future. That's our empathy gap. Another theory, it's called the terror management theory. We are afraid to die, definitely. But we cannot survive by thinking about death every day. We have, and somebody said that already, I think Jan said it, we have to forget that we are going to die. We have to put it aside. It's a helpful denial. However, catastrophes are a reminder of our mortality. We have put that fear aside, but then there's a catastrophe or there's a climate change happening, and we are reminded of something that we have so deliberately tried to forget. So Greenman and Solomon talked about a psychological conflict. On one hand, we have this self-preservation instinct, and on the other hand, we have this very confrontational realization that death is inevitable. And in order to cope with that terror that we feel, we escape and we create cultural beliefs. And this is why we have religion, and this is why we believe in afterlife, and this is why we believe that we are superior than plants or animals. And this is why we create our national identities. This is our way to believe that we are immortal in a way, even psychological way. So we need the denial of death because that is what makes our life meaningful. This is how we cope, and this is how we create more quality in our life. If we were confronted with death every single day, we wouldn't do any of these things that we're doing. And I'm not talking about inventions or technology and science. I'm talking about simple things. You would wake up in the morning and you would be like, shall I cook meal or dinner? No, what's the point? We're going to die eventually. If we were confronted every day with the scenario of death, nothing would be meaningful. We have to put it aside. That's what we're doing. We need a little bit of denial in order to create meaningful life. And we need to create meaningful life in order to cope with scenarios such as these of climate change. Also, existential psychologists are talking about fear of death as an existential fear. We are all aware that we're going to die, but also that ignites a positive anxiety that will leave our life into more meaning and to more potential and more opportunities. We need that fear. It's existential, but also it includes a drive for life. Now, the last theory that I would like to talk to is about the stages of change. As I said in the beginning, human beings are resistant to change. They don't want to change, or they don't want to be pushed to change. They want to take it slowly. They want to understand why they need to change. And I'm going to use a very simple example. There are many people, millions of people, that they want to quit smoking. And if you go and Google how to quit smoking, you're going to find, I don't know, millions of entries on Google, many ways that you can try in order to quit smoking. But still, it's still very difficult. It's still people struggling in quitting smoking. Why? Because we know the how, but we haven't processed the why. And this is what Prochaska and Di Clemente are talking about. Change needs to happen in a specific way. We need to go through these specific stages in order to bring a healthy and balanced change in our life. The first stage of change is what they call pre-contemplation. And this is the change where actually you don't want to change. This is the change where you think that I don't find any problematic in my behavior. I don't see the reason why I need to change. I don't see the reason why I need to quit smoking. I'm still healthy. I don't see the reason why I should, recycle plastic. Everything is okay. I mean, other people are recycling for me. So this is the stage where I don't see the pros of change. And I'm not ready yet, but it's still at the back of my head a little bit. The next stage is the contemplation. This is where I start seeing how problematic my behavior is. or how I'm going to be better off without that behavior and when I implement new behaviors and new habits in my life. This is where the pros of changing are more than the pros of not changing. The third stage is the preparation stage. This is where I start thinking, what do I need to do? How can I change my environment? How can I change my habits? How can I prepare emotionally or psychologically? What am I going to say to myself in order to motivate myself? Then we go into action and we implement all the things that we have prepared before. And then we go into maintenance where we keep these habits. And of course, during the action and the maintenance stage, the danger, the risk of relapsing is also big. But also, it's okay, it's normal. These are the stages that we can try and error. These are the stages that we can say, well, I tried that, but it didn't work. Let me try something different. Or I need more support, or I need more resources on this. These are the stages where we are adding or subtracting anything that we don't need. And the last stage is termination. We don't need to implement any change because the change has already happened. The old behavior is not there anymore. So as you see, we need to prepare ourselves to change. We cannot just yell onto somebody's face, you need to start doing something and expect that they are going to start doing it the next day. We need to create the ground for this change to happen. So, how to embrace the future? Let's talk about how we are going to use this feeling of anxiety in order to bring the change that we're going to bring. Of course, anxiety is not something pleasant, but again, is not something necessarily bad. It's an emotional signal that we need to pay attention to. It's something that brings our attention to what we need to do, what action we need to take. So the antidote to eco-anxiety is not to stop the climate change. That's not realistic. The same way that the antidote to anxiety, to any anxiety we have in our life, is not to stop overwhelming events or stressful events from happening in our life. That's not possible. Pain is inevitable in our life. We're going to have to go through transition. We're going to experience death and loss. We're going to lose our job. We are going to change country. That's inevitable. The antidote to anxiety is not to stop painful things from happening in our life. The antidote is to learn how to cope with these stressful events. The antidote is inside us. And it's the feeling of acceptance, to accept what is happening, to understand what is happening inside us, to feel safe with ourselves first, instead of expecting things to be safe externally, and to trust ourselves that one way or another, we are going to cope because we have the skills, because we have the resources, because we have the ideas, because we have the tools, whatever. This is called self-trust. And the coping mechanisms that we said before, the avoid, surrender, and or overcompensate, they are driven by fear. And especially when we cope with this fear in an extreme way. When we go into avoid, surrender, overcompensate, we are being driven by fear. But now we want to cope with anxiety because of, as you said before, love or trust or safety, not because fear drives us. Fear drives us only to maladaptive and dysfunctional coping ways. So that's what we want to explore. It's a new challenge. As I said, it's a new feeling, it's a new experience, and we want to give it space. And while we're giving it space, what we want to do is protect our own mental health. As we said, the mental health impact is huge. Of course, it's something that is happening on our planet. It has a very practical impact. But also, if we're not intact in our mental health, we're not going to save anybody. We're not going to save ourselves. First, we need to protect ourselves and our mental health and to process what is that we are experiencing, Otherwise, it's going to be just a messy reaction instead of a healthy response. So what are a couple of ways? First of all, accept that this anxiety is normal. It's an emotional signal, as we said. It's a healthy response to a climate crisis. Thank God that we feel anxiety. Otherwise, we wouldn't do anything if we didn't feel anxiety. We would just continue ruining all our resources and wasting our planet. Thank God that we feel this anxiety. So we need to stop dismissing ourselves, but also others when we're feeling anxiety, the eco-anxiety. You're not delusional, you're not exaggerating, you're not too sensitive. And by accepting, it doesn't mean that you compromise or that you give up. It doesn't mean that you just sit back and say, well, it is what it is. No, you're just accepting the feeling that you're having and you're giving it space instead of going into avoiding or surrendering or overcompensating. Remember that we said before, the overcompensating people are people that they haven't processed what they're feeling. They don't take care of what they're feeling or other people are feeling, and they're just hurrying into solutions that they are too much, or they are denying the problem, which leads, of course, to more guilt. So there's nothing wrong with what we feel. We need to validate ourselves and to accept uncomfortable feelings of distress and vulnerability. This is fundamental at this point. We are vulnerable. Let's accept it. It doesn't mean that we're going to die, but we have to accept our vulnerabilities. We have to accept that we can do as much. Only when we accept it, we can relax and go into healthy responses. Otherwise, we're still in panic. And of course, we need to forgive ourselves for all the action that we haven't taken or all the failure to prioritize climate action. We need to forgive, to not be held back by all this emotional burden, and to continue working, feeling more comfortable. Embrace uncertainty. That's a big thing that we need to do, because it's a very uncertain circumstance. We don't need too much optimism or too much pessimism. We need realistic optimism. And why we need that? Because, as we said before, without our mental health, without our mental balance, we're not going to save anybody. We're not going to save the planet, not ourselves, not our children. So we care about our mental health first. And in order to do that, we create this realistic optimism, which means that sometimes we don't know what's going to happen, or we don't know what's going to happen in the future. I'm just doing things for now that I think that they're helpful. We don't need to fake control or take controllability for granted. People who don't take controllability for granted are people that they're more flexible, are people that they don't expect, they don't panic when they lose control, are people that they are reaching out to each other more often, and they're more generous. We need to remind that we don't know how technology and science will help us in the future, what we said before as the empathy gap, and to break negative, unhelpful, apocalyptic, ruminating thinking. That's not helpful. That's not helping at all. We're just stuck in there. The more we think about worst case scenarios, the more we get stuck. So we need the negative thinking only if it leads to some action, or only if we embrace it with acceptance. If it's only ruminating or just dooming scenarios, we don't need it. And we can do that through mindfulness. When we stay in the present moment, instead of going into the future, let me see what I can do right now. Let me see what is the most that I can do right now. Also, another thing that we need to embrace, and that's something that you mentioned before with the values, the cultural values, I think. Our values have changed. Our parents or our grandparents, they're coming from a generation that experienced wars, poverty, insecurity. And for them, it was important. This is what we mean with values. What is important? And for them, it was important to achieve, to find a job, to find security, to find stability, to create family, to make roots in a place, to feel safe, to feel successful. This is not our struggle anymore. This is our parents or our grandparents' struggles. We have different values now. We think of different things as important right now, which our parents or previous generations, they couldn't imagine even. For us right now, it's important to have to take care of nature. Our values are about responsibility, awareness, mental health. Nobody was talking about mental health 30 years ago or 40 years ago. Now our values are about community, activism, flexibility. Remember before they were talking about stability, but now our values are about flexibility. How can I create a home where I can be flexible, where I'm not stuck, where I'm not going to die by being here in this place? Are about acceptance and are about creating quality of life. Completely different values. And it doesn't mean that we don't want stability anymore, but we are now creating extra values, different. We are adjusting in a different way. So we need also to take that into consideration when we are trying to talk to our parents, to previous generations about climate change, and to integrate two different worlds and have a conversation. We're also trying to boost resilience. The American Psychological Association talks about resilience. And in order to boost resilience, we need to foster caring and trusting relationships. We need to reach out. It's very lonely. And that's a challenge which is beyond us. We cannot deal with that all by ourselves. And we need not only to engage others into action, but we need to engage others into talking about this challenge and sharing our feelings. We shouldn't isolate. We need to try connect with like-minded people, not viewing problems as unsolvable, making achievable goals, looking at problems in a wider context, focus on self-care and positive self-image, and keep personal connections with places and cultural ties where possible. Remember that we said before in the beginning about solastalgia, how we feel pain when we disconnect from nature, from our environment, from our home countries, from Earth, from planet Earth even. So we need to build stronger connection with nature. That's very helpful. Detachment is one of the avoiding coping mechanisms, and we don't want to go there because that doesn't lead to any form of action. By spending more time outdoors, we alleviate our eco-anxiety, our anxiety, and we feel more connected with nature. We feel grateful, we feel relaxed, we feel that how much we love our environment, how much we love nature, and how much it's our passion to do something about our nature. And again, we get reminded of what you said before, how all of these things that we're doing are coming out of place of love, not out of place of anger. We're doing what we're doing because we love nature. We love the place that we live in. And we need to be reminded. Sometimes we forget, but we need to be reminded just by being out there in nature, being in contact with the natural environment. The other time that we were presenting this workshop was there was a question from one of the participants that said, how are we going to support the children? Children struggle. They cannot conceive what is this climate change. They cannot conceive the consequences of climate change. And their imagination can go really wild when we don't explain things to them. So they struggle with processing and coping with these complicated feelings and abstract concepts. So what we need to do is create space for them, open the dialogue so that they can feel safe to discuss maybe silly questions, maybe silly feelings, whatever it is. It's not silly at all. We need to validate their feelings and empathize with them. They're just little human beings that they know nothing about the world, and they are 100% depending on us. So we need to offer age-appropriate answers and to keep an open dialogue, but also to keep an eye on what coping mechanism they are using. There are children that they're not going to ask their mom or dad about the environment because they think that they're going to be a burden to them. They're going to worry them. They're going to make mama or daddy sad. There are children that they're reacting with anger or hostility. We need to keep an eye on what coping mechanism, avoid, surrender, or overcompensate the kids are using, and help them create healthy coping mechanisms. And healthy coping mechanisms mean accepting what you're feeling. Let's put it on the table and start discussing about it. That's how they feel included and safe. And of course, we can also take action as a family and see and do stuff together. That also decreases the feelings of isolation and loneliness that they feel. Also, teachers, they're struggling with how they're going to explain these to kids. A teacher, I was reading another article, worried about how a discussion about climate change or a class about climate change would be for kids. And maybe it would be overwhelming for them. So she asked the students how they felt after the climate change lesson. And only 4% of the class thought that humans would successfully address climate change. So they see that they already panic, they already feel depressed. And one of them said, I understand that global warming is an important part of learning from this class, but some material from one of these lectures gave me an anxiety attack. So that wasn't fun at all. So what we want to do is to give them a chance to process the climate change, but not only throw knowledge on them or information, but also support them emotionally. Support them so that when they're feeling stress, when they're feeling anxiety, to embrace that anxiety, to tell them that this is normal what you're feeling. And of course, you're about to, something that you really love is at risk. Of course, it's so important and it's so valid what you're feeling. But also, don't forget that they're teenagers. They're still children, and they want to experience a few more years of carefree childhood and adolescence. So keep that also in mind. Don't overburden them. Also protect yourself. Remember, our mental health is important. Protect yourself from overexposure. Know when to disengage. Know when to unplug from social media or from news. It's you that you know best when this is a threshold that you feel overwhelmed. Remember, we're talking about inner locus of control. So you cannot expect from the news to stop coming at your face. You need to define when it's the day or the time that you're going to stop watching, or how much of this you're going to watch, or what are your sources. Evaluate your sources, because there are so many fake news or terrorizing news out there. So avoid the doom scrolling. And when we say take action, because we're talking about how to take action in order to protect ourselves from the anxiety, from the emotional overwhelmness, talk to others about environmental practices, volunteer, but also comfort yourself emotionally. Remind yourself how valuable your help is, even if you don't see it. Because sometimes we expect, this instant gratification. We're going to do something and then the planet will change. Remind yourself that this is a tiny change, but it's also very important. Remind yourself also that you can do that much. You cannot be everywhere. You cannot save the dolphins. You cannot save the plastic. You cannot save the trees. You cannot save everything. Show yourself some self-compassion that you can do that much, but it's your best. And thank you for doing your best for that. Remind yourself your values. I'm doing it because I love nature. I'm doing it because I want to protect myself, my mental health. I'm doing it because I love it, not because I hate what others are doing. It doesn't need to come from a place of hate. As you said, it needs to come from a place of love. Connect with your community or with people with same values, or create even support groups so that you can talk about it. And this is something that I also found, and it was amazing. There was a guy who created this website, Is This How You Feel? And he is a climate scientist. And from 2014 to 2015, he approached world's leading climate scientists and asked them this simple question: how does climate change make you feel? And their responses were really moving. So he took all these letters and he created this website. If you Google it, if you find it, you're going to see letters, actual letters with like their own handwriting of how they're feeling. And this was something like a support group. The scientists went in there and they could actually channel the anxiety that they were feeling. So I found that incredible. Also, don't forget the positive impact. Loneliness is reduced because we're reaching out to each other, because we're having exactly this meeting today and we're talking about that, because you spent 20 minutes in a breakout room and you were reaching out to each other and you were talking with each other. Loneliness is reduced. Altruism is increased. Social bonds are strengthened. Resilience is improved. We live in an age where individuals have more power than any time in history. And look at your sphere of influence, employer, networks, family, and influence them. We don't need to convince 100% of people. Let's set realistic goals. Only 25% is enough. And then an idea can go from marginal to mainstream. So there's the feeling of hope that we need to cultivate. And again, talking from our inner locus of control, we are going to create hope. We are not going to wait for something to happen to give us hope. We are going to create it. We all feel fear. Nobody's excluded from fear. Nobody's fearless. The activists out there, all the people that they're taking any kind of action, it's not because they're not feeling fear. Actually, they're feeling fear, but they're acting upon it in a healthy way. So this is where we need to decide, are we going to let this fear isolate us or bully us or discourage us? Or are we going to use that fear as energy, fuel to come together, empathize, be authentic, and protect ourselves and others? We are all afraid, and that's okay. Let's talk about it and let's embrace our vulnerabilities and uncertainty and also protect our mental health. We cannot do anything if we don't have our health, physical health, and mental health. Nothing will work. Thank you very much.